welcome. This is Pam. Today I'm going to be sharing my journey, my recovery from multiple sclerosis, and I'm also going to be sharing the steps that I took to recover. Just one moment. I'm just going to make sure that this is plugged in here. There we go. Awesome. So welcome. My name is Pam Bartha, and if we haven't, wellness champion and the founder of Live Disease Free, and today I'm going to be sharing my incredible journey recovering from multiple sclerosis, and it's been 35 years now. So my journey began when I was just 28 years old. I thought I was a healthy young mom. I was raising young children, eating healthy, and I was a little bit tired. I had 2 children under the age of 2, but I thought that I was healthy because I had always been healthy all my life. And then one sunny Sunday afternoon, my family was out at the park. We were out with my kids at the park, and I had this black small spot in the center of my vision. And that dot got bigger the next day. And by the third day, it was third or fourth day, it was a complete blackout. And so I went to an eye specialist, and he said I had optic neuritis. But it was a really severe case of optic neuritis. They normally don't see a complete blackout. It was like I had a black patch on my eye. And so as I went to that specialist, he quickly referred me to an MS University Hospital, one of the best we have in Canada. So I'm Canadian. And this was back in 1988, right? A long time ago. And so I went to that expert. It was a neurologist, and it was an MS clinic. And I figured that he was going to fix me. I didn't know what was wrong, but I had never been really sick. And I'm from the generation where you go to your doctor and they take care of you. And you just think that they're going to heal you, especially if you've never experienced sickness before. And so I went to this leading neurologist, and he did all his testing, and he diagnosed me with multiple sclerosis. And I didn't know what MS was. It sounded kind of serious, but I wasn't sure what multiple sclerosis was. He assured me that it's an incurable disease, that you will become completely disabled in time. There's nothing you can do to change the course of your life. And I was in shock. I was like, how is this possible? I'm a healthy person, and now all of a sudden I have this mystery incurable disease. And so he also told me, he made a point of telling me that there's people going to tell you about all kinds of snake oil cures. And as the expert, I'm telling you that there is nothing you can do to change the course of your life. You will be completely disabled in time. I left his office completely devastated. I felt like my life was over. My husband was 28 also, and I was 28, and we had a young family. And I thought, wow, how am I going to raise my children? And what a burden I would be to my husband. And I share that with you because a lot of you have shared with me that you were healthy all your life, and then all of a sudden you weren't, right? So this is, just one sec. This is the mystery of chronic disease, especially a disease like multiple sclerosis, where you don't have a history of being sick. I was very active, played sports. And so I wasn't a couch potato, wasn't eating a lot of junk food, not smoking, not drinking alcohol. I was raising a family. And to think that you're healthy one minute and then to be told that you're going to be completely disabled is quite devastating. So we drove home we're in British Columbia, so we drove home through a mountain pass. And all I could think about was, how am I going to raise my children, and what a burden I would be to my husband. He was young, he had his whole life ahead of him, and he was going to have to take care of me. So, long story short, very shortly after my diagnosis, I got home, and I had tingling in my legs, weakness in my legs also, terrible headaches, terrible insomnia, and of course the optic neuritis. And I was put on prednisone, and I was basically on the couch because I could not take care of my kids. My mom stepped in to help. And then after, I would say, just a very short period of time, maybe a couple of weeks, my mother-in-law gave me a book on integrative health. And that book gave me a little bit of hope. It it talked about infection in the body, especially candida. Like candida is a type of yeast, which is a type of fungus. And this doctor, Dr. William Crook, wrote the book, The Yeast Connection. And my mother-in-law did not know anything about yeast, like infections really, or candida. But she thought, because they talked about multiple sclerosis in that book, she thought this might be really helpful for Pam. So when I was so devastated, I was like flatlined on the couch. I couldn't take care of my kids. And I just reached out to God and I really begged for help. And I do that a lot. And he really answered my prayers, I believe, because I only received one book, and that was from my mother-in-law. And when I read that book, although I had never had a vaginal yeast infection, didn't know what candida was, I really could relate to that book because they were talking about the gut and constipation and stomach aches and how that's how it starts. And so when I read that book, I could relate to a lot of the symptoms that I had for years and years. And so I decided that I was going to take a different path because this was a medical doctor. He made a lot of sense. He gave me hope when the experts in Canada gave me no hope for a cure. And so I decided to take a different path, and I decided to not follow standard of care with multiple sclerosis. I decided to try to figure out, like, is it candida? Is it other infections? And so over the years, I've tried many different things, and I wanted to share like a few things about myself that maybe will really help you to understand how you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis or another disease. It doesn't have to be MS, because I truly believe that all chronic diseases, that there are infections involved, that they're all infectious diseases, and that's a really big cause of all chronic disease. So when I was young, we lived on a farm, and we're from the generation, there were 6 kids, I was the oldest. Whenever we would have a high fever or temperature, sore throat, cough, whatever, the doctors would really recommend to go on antibiotics, and they would kind of scare my mom, saying that, if your kids have strep throat and you don't treat it properly and quickly, it can damage their heart. So mom would literally beg for antibiotics for us. So when probably, before the age of 10, I was on multiple courses of antibiotics. And I should even backtrack a little bit earlier. My mom said that I was a colicky baby. So I was fussy. I didn't tolerate the cereals for babies that had gluten in it. And, I would cry. And she said, this is not fun to admit, but she said I was really constipated as a baby too. And the doctor told her to eat a chocolate bar, and that would help me to have a bowel movement. Interesting, right? So like right from the get-go, I was, my microbiome was off, and I know my mom's microbiome was off. And we know through the work of Dr. Klinghardt and others that the microbes that we inherit from our parents impact our health much more than the genes that we inherit from our parents. So right off from the start, I was out of balance. Obviously I had too many parasites and not enough health promoting microbes, or else I wouldn't have been constipated, wouldn't have been fussy. And then of course, further antibiotics were not helping. I also lived on a farm. We had lots of exposure to, playing in the dirt, which I absolutely loved. We had this in Alberta, like the only trees that would grow in the area we lived were like poplar trees, because they grow really fast. So we would be out building forts. We were outside all the time. We had all kinds of animals. We had pigs and bunnies and cattle and horse and turkeys and chickens and cats, lots of cats. So we were with lots of animals in the soil outside, which is good and it's super healthy. But for someone like myself, who was on antibiotics regularly and also had a kind of being out of balance at birth, then I was more susceptible to parasites in the environment, for them to be able to become established inside of me. So maybe share with me if you can relate to some of these things that they happened in your life also. And we know through research that I've shared in different blog posts that there is evidence that if a child has a dog, as a teenager, I believe that it is, if you have a dog as a teenager, you have a much higher chance of having multiple sclerosis. And I also, then as a teenager, I also had a horse. And it's interesting that, some of the filarial worms we treat in our horses, we treat in different animals. So I was with a lot of animals, and I love animals so much. And then when I was in grade 12, we had a high school trip to, it was to Spain and to Africa. So it's like I think it's like a 1 week where a whole bunch of kids from the school go and you get to tour a little bit. And also the teachers would go along as a chaperone. So I was in Tangiers, Morocco back in the 80s, or I should say way earlier than that, because I was still in high school. So I graduated in 79, so it had been earlier, maybe 78. And malaria was still common there. Like, it wasn't like, maybe not huge outbreaks, but definitely malaria was present there. So if you know of the work that I shared, Babesia malaria type protist has been really linked with MS also. Not to say that I had to pick up a malaria parasite from being there, because there's lots of people in Alberta, which is where I was growing up as a young child, that have multiple sclerosis. It's kind of a hotbed, Canada in general, but especially the rural areas of Canada. So the areas where I was growing up definitely had higher incidence of multiple sclerosis. So I had the disruption to the microbiome. I had lots of exposure to parasites, whether it's, from that trip or whether it was just from in our area. And we're told that we don't have parasites in developed countries, and nothing could be farther from the truth. As we look into the research, even if you look at, different health authorities, you'll see that these parasites are present in developed countries and in underdeveloped countries, in both countries. But it's just that in developed countries, we should be treating our water. We shouldn't be drinking raw water. We hopefully have better sanitary, like maybe we have better sewer systems, but we are still exposed to parasites as would people that are in underdeveloped countries. So it's really interesting that it's like, why do our doctors believe that? Why do they believe that we don't have parasites in Canada, for example? We're in areas like where I grew up. We're in a rural area. We had lots of animals around us. We deworm our animals. So why would they think that we can't possibly get parasites from the animals even that were around? So lots of exposure to parasites, lots of disruption to the microbiome. So those are really big factors. As a teenager, I was on tetracycline for several months for acne. I think I was the only out of all the children in our family that was on tetracycline. And tetracycline is a broad spectrum antibiotic, and it really devastates our ecosystem. It really decreases the health promoting microbes that we would have left inside of our digestive tract and the rest of our body. And so it was interesting that I was on the antibiotics before I went on that trip to Spain and to Africa. So interesting. So I was like a sitting duck. I was definitely like vulnerable to, obviously, like what I see in myself looking back now is that I was always the skinny kid. I was like, my mom was trying to fatten me up. She would be giving me ice cream, and then my brothers and sisters would eat ice cream too, and they would gain weight, and I wouldn't gain weight. I couldn't gain weight. I had constipation. I remember as a child, like having a bowel movement once every several days, thought it was normal, right? So you start to look back at these kind of things and you start to see, okay, there were definite warning signs. When we would have, like, we had 6 kids in our family, and we were like little house on the prairie, like way out in the boonies. So we rarely ever ate out. But if we ever did eat out, I would be one laying on the ground with a stomach ache. I always had stomach ache. So that's another sign, right? And then I remember as like a young adult, like a bowel movement once a week, right? And so those are all important signs. So I had lots of energy, I had a clear mind, I was healthy, but I was underweight, dealing with constipation. So I really believe that back in those earlier years, I had more probably like parasitic worms. I didn't probably have the protozoa that can cause a lot more symptoms, maybe not even the intestinal flukes, because they're a lot more inflammatory, but all of those things would have definitely suppressed the immune system. And then at some point, I was exposed to a malaria babesia type parasite because for years my red blood cell work has been off. Like when you go in for your blood work, the width of my red blood cells would be above normal. Sometimes I have less red blood cells in my blood test than I should, so it's like a below normal test result. They're wider, right? The MCV, the MCHC, all of those different tests are going to be different. And so in me, and that is a really big sign of a parasite that's infecting my red blood cells. And then other symptoms too. So I had these, they're kind of like a little blood blister, like a tiny little blood blister that would appear on my torso. This was especially after pregnancy. And like flickering vision. I don't know if you've ever seen that. If you go from light to dark or dark to light, where it looks like little lines. Remember the old TVs where you have that vision kind of flickering on the television screen? Tinnitus and sweats, the night sweats, air hunger. So having all of those symptoms, plus having changes in red blood cells, right? But I'm kind of jumping ahead because this is something we've learned more recently. Before it was like just obviously had parasitic worms. Then when I was diagnosed with MS, we learned about Candida. So definitely had some benefit in treating Candida. But then it's hard to know because a lot of these different Candida therapies, they were more natural that I used back in the day, in the early days of my diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. But also we did use things like for sure nystatin tablets, but I think I used like monostat. There was another one that we could get from, and I can't remember what the name of it was. It was something like that. So I did use antifungal drugs, just really gentle ones that only work in the gut. So not liquid nystatin because it has sugar in it, but it would have been the tablets. And then nystatin was not available in tablet form for several years. Went to, they were promoting diflucan, but now I believe you can get nystatin again. So again, starting off with, stomach issues and constipation, antibiotics as a teenager, traveling a little bit, which could have definitely introduced me to malaria, or I could have had babesia just from southern Alberta. And then also the filarial worms that Dr. Alan McDonald found in every subject. Very possible from even the horses that I was around. Like I had a horse, my sister had a horse, and we spent all our time, like from probably the age of 16 to until I got married and started having kids. So probably around 20, 21. So lots of exposure to parasites. And then of course, you could possibly say tapeworms and roundworms, etc. So then as we were learning about Candida, then the next thing was really learning more about Lyme disease, about the vector-borne infections that cause Lyme disease. And so there were more Lyme literate doctors. They were using antibiotics. So I was tested when the DNA connections first, that's a lab, when they first were established. And I think the test was around $500 then. And they would test you for Borrelia and Babesia and Bartonella and Ehrlichia, like quite a few different infections that travel together as Lyme disease. And I definitely tested positive that I had Babesia and Borrelia and I think Ehrlichia. So the problem with that test is that just because you have some DNA from these microbes inside of your blood, that doesn't mean that's what's causing your worst symptoms or all of your symptoms. It could be there in very low grade and it might not be affecting you, and it might be, and we don't know. That's the problem. The way that they get you prepared for this test, because if you have chronic Lyme, it's not going to be just sitting in your blood, it moves into your tissue. So I had to do a Rolfing session. It's like a deep tissue massage. It's very uncomfortable, where they kind of take their elbows and they grind it into your leg muscles to push the Borrelia, push the spirochetes out into your blood. And then they're released into your urine. You collect your urine and then send it in. So for example, my sister Caroline had that test done too, and it showed she had some DNA from some of the different Lyme infections, but she's asymptomatic. She doesn't have any disease symptoms. She's just a healthy young lady. So I think that we all harbor some of these parasites inside of us, but that's the problem with tests, is that you can't just rely on a test and go gangbusters with antibiotics, because what if because there's a lot of people that have Lyme disease that have been on a lot of antibiotics and they're no better off, right? It maybe had a tiny bit of symptom improvement at the beginning, but not after that. And we've seen that in our students. The antibiotics just don't seem to be very helpful. So then after exploring Lyme and using some herbs for, possibly Borrelia and Babesia, etc., I started to learn more about the other parasites. And so this was where, through studying under different doctors, I learned about the roundworms and the tapeworms and the intestinal flukes and all of those big parasites. And that was quite shocking. And so that I studied under a doctor, and he teaches doctors on how to treat parasites. And so he gave us his protocols, and of course, I worked with a practitioner here, and I before I ever share with my students, and I should share too, let me backtrack, is that since I started recognizing that it's a disruption to the microbiome, it's certain parasites that are causing, and of course we thought Candida at the start, but since I started early on treating pathogenic microbes, treating different types, big and small parasites, especially the small ones at the start, I was able to arrest the MS. I was able to become symptom-free. I want to backtrack too. In the earlier days when I was really sick, I found that an antihistamine was really helpful for me. I had terrible insomnia. I was like wired. I couldn't sleep. And, with the optic neuritis and the tingling, and it was just awful. So I used Polaramine back in the day. I don't think we can get it here in Canada anymore, but it's just a plain Jane first generation antihistamine, meaning that it's a drowsy, makes you feel a little sleepy. But it didn't make me feel sleepy. It just made me feel normal. And then I could just sleep when I was supposed to sleep, and I could function. I felt more peaceful. I wasn't that vibrating, humming. I don't know. It's like your autonomic system is just like really revved up. So that really helped a lot. And I used different natural herbs from the health food store. Back in the day, when I was really sick, I didn't even have the internet in my home. I didn't have a computer. So there was this little health food store, and they would sell the Alive magazine, which is just like a health magazine. It still is available in Canada, maybe in other countries too. But they would have a book review at the back of the magazine. And so every month I would quickly go to the back and see, is there a doctor that wrote a book that could help me? And so that's where I learned about the Yeast Connection book by Dr. William Crook. And I learned about the other book called Candida by Dr. Luc de Schepper. And I learned about another book called The Missing Diagnosis by Dr. Orion Truss. And then finally, another Canadian doctor, Dr. Rona Zoltan, and he had the complete Candida guide. So back in the day, in the 1980s and before, they were really focused only on Candida. But at least I had 4 medical doctors that were way ahead of their time. This was like over 35, probably like 40 years ago. I wouldn't buy their books right now. You might find them in libraries. They're very outdated, but still it's so interesting how these doctors knew back then that when you treat Candida, and they were using herbs, a lot of them too. So what they didn't realize is that they were also treating other microbes, maybe not the biggest worms, but if you're using garlic and if you're using all of the oil of oregano and these different antimicrobial herbs, you are definitely knocking back different types of bad bacteria and some protozoa, and of course, Candida, and possibly mold if we had mold too. So what is so sad is that today, 40 years later, all of that research has been lost and it has just been dropped. And then on my masterclass training, I also share that there's over 100 years of research showing that Borrelia, or I should say a spirochete, that is probably Borrelia, a bacteria that causes Lyme disease, they have been finding this spirochete in MS patients since at least 1911. And so that's a very long time ago. So for some of us, Borrelia might be a really big part of the neurological symptoms that we're dealing with. And then more recently, we discovered that and I shared this. So the thing that I want to share with you is that number one is that I really do care. I really want everyone to get well. I have spent a ton of time researching. We have an amazing Live Disease-Free blog that you can go to, articles that I write every week. And so one of the most recent finds that I've shared with everyone is that there's a ton of research that's showing that MS is more of a vascular disease than an autoimmune disease. And I talked about autoimmune disease in The Great Deception, what I did last week, the article that I wrote. So when you go back to the MS being a vascular disease, you'll see that, again, it's just like the Lyme disease research that goes back to 1911. Well, the malaria type, and when I say malaria, it's like Babesia, malaria, we don't know yet, but they're both treated the same. They're both single cell parasites that infect our red blood cells. So it could be that, in some countries it's more malaria, in other countries more Babesia, I don't know, but they're treated the same. They affect us very, very similarly as far as affecting our blood vessels. So this research since the late 1800s, early 1900s, where they were treating outbreaks of malaria with quinine, and they were treating MS patients with quinine, and they noticed that they had huge improvements in a lot of the patients, that MS patients that received quinine. And so then you put that together with all of the research, showing like the symptoms of malaria, Babesia, and even with MS, we have restricted blood flows. I've shared that we are more prone to strokes, we're more prone to microbleeds. So there's just a mountain of evidence that for a lot of us that have MS, that's probably a really significant parasite that we're dealing with. It is for me. And, I knew about Babesia for years already, and I knew I probably had it. And then when I'd go to these medical conferences where I study under these doctors, and then there's always a trade show kind of where you go for breaks and you can go look at all the new medical devices and instruments, and there's these energy testing machines, and so you let them do a little demo on you, and they're like, oh, I can pick up Babesia on you, right? So I've had so many different confirmations, but it was really when I started to study the MS is a vascular disease, and then you're just like, oh my gosh, that is something that is really characteristic of MS. It's like all of the blood flow issues, right? Because they're using CCSVI for MS. And so I have so much research on my website, and I do this because I want this to go into the hands of the doctors. I want our doctors to be able to treat us early on before we have a diagnosis. But the system is pretty stuck right now. Our healthcare system is really stuck. So my journey has been 35 years. It's been a very long time, and it's been evolving, and we continue to learn, and we share everything that we have learned. My masterclass training says all the steps you need to take. I have our website, we've got the diet, and again, the diet is so incredibly helpful. All the guidelines are for free on our website under research, then look up the Live Disease-Free Diet Guidelines. And by decreasing the carbs enough, you make the parasites less active. They don't have as much food. They love carbohydrates and sugars. That is their favorite source of energy. And so when you decrease that, you start to feel a lot better. I've just shared many of the successes of our students that, like sometimes they're not even using, like one of the students right now, 2 weeks ago, she shared, I had a weekend, I didn't even use my cane once. And that's just with the diet. So the parasites are still there. They're less active, less inflammation. This is called immune modulation. So again, we started with just for myself, and this is where I want you guys to think about yourself, is that I probably had just some roundworms or some parasites that don't cause a lot of symptoms other than constipation and maybe a stomach ache if you eat the wrong food, maybe too much sugar, for example. And then, continuing to be exposed to different types of parasites, but being on a lot of antibiotics, especially for acne. That was different for myself than all of the other kids in our family. I was the only one that was on tetracycline for months. And I've shared in my book, Become a Wellness Champion, there's a study where they looked at, I think it was at least 70,000 people. And the people that were on tetracycline for a few months, they had a significant increase in especially inflammatory bowel disease. When you take a broad spectrum antibiotic, it really, really devastates your health promoting microbes. It just really wipes them out. Maybe even more so before it's dealing with the acne or whatever your other, maybe sore throat or bronchitis, whatever you're dealing with. And so then as I was really out of balance, again, I was more susceptible to maybe it's even a mosquito bite. I don't think we had a lot of ticks in southern Alberta. I don't remember any ticks. Or maybe I just picked up the filarial worms from my horse. But I really believe that for me, the babesia or malaria, that is a really big factor that was in my history because of the blood work, because of the symptoms, right? And because it's connected with multiple sclerosis. But luckily, because I caught the MS early, I caught these parasites before they caused a lot of damage in me. And I was treating them, right? Using different types of herbs in the early days, and they are helpful. But I could never clear the bigger parasites with just the herbs alone. So then when we learned how to incorporate the parasite drugs to treat the bigger parasites, oh my gosh, that just adds another layer of wellness. It just helps you to feel like you're 20 years younger, because even though maybe some of the bigger parasites in your gut, they don't cause MS, but they suppress your immune system. But then the malaria babesia is known to suppress your immune system, and so is Borrelia. So what happens is you think about the camel's back, and we end up with, different types of parasites, and then we have stress in life, right? And so I was going through pregnancies and up all night with your kids and being definitely sleep deprived and just push. That's my personality. Just go, go, go. If you're tired, just suck it up and just keep going. And then those of us that are, I call them high achievers, that we just like to get a lot of stuff done, we will hit the brick wall before other people that maybe pace themselves a little bit more. And that was for sure me. And I've had to learn a lot about, sure, you can go hard, but you've got to you can't go hard like nonstop. If you become sleep deprived, you better build up your sleep again like a bank account, or else your immune system becomes weakened. So that has been my journey. And unfortunately, I was able to arrest the symptoms of these parasites quite early on. It did take me a few years, to be completely symptom-free. I would say probably within a year to a year and a half that I was, virtually symptom-free, but I've never had another MS attack. I've never had to use any MS medications. And I've just, now that I'm in my 60s, I'm actually doing better than probably in my 20s, because I carried those parasites around with me for years and years. And I can't sterilize my body from all the parasites. I live on a little farm right now. We have chickens and sheep and horses and dogs, and I think that's it. So I'm exposed to parasites, and I love animals so much. Going outside is my happy place. And so I'm not willing to give that up, and I don't think we have to, but we have to pay attention. So if we find that we're super healthy, we've restored balance, but we're maybe waking up throughout the night, maybe having a hard time falling asleep, or waking up a few times throughout the night, and then maybe we have a little bit of brain fog, or maybe we just find that we're just more tired, you can't just run up the stairs like usual. All of these different, or little rashes, little stomach issues, a little bit of constipation. These are all signs that I had early on in life that I never paid attention to, because my doctors didn't tell me and I didn't know. And so I just kept going and going and going until the burden of parasites was too much for my immune system. And then my immune system started to just let it go. And then I ended up with not a little case of optic neuritis, but a really significant case, a complete blackout. And to this day, I can't drive with my left eye. It left permanent damage, and I didn't have enough guidance to turn it around. Like maybe if I had that severe case and the doctors would have known, even maybe an antihistamine would have helped a lot early on, but nobody knew. I was put on steroids, and steroids don't heal you. They will just help whatever recovery you're going to have. They will help you to have it more quickly, but they will not give you more recovery. And that's the problem with steroids. There's a time and a place for them if you're crisis intervention, but they're not going to give you any additional healing, just whatever healing would have been possible. But if you can definitely decrease the inflammation as quickly as possible, then you can minimize the damage. And most people don't have optic neuritis that significantly like I did. So if I hadn't have learned all of this, I honestly don't know if I would have been alive today. Because again, I don't just, I just go. And if I hadn't have learned this and dealt with it and treated the cause, then because I had such a severe case of optic neuritis and I was really sick, like with the tingling, the weakness, the headaches, just having to lay on the couch. Thank goodness my mom lived right next door. And so she was able to come over and watch my kids because I could not do that. So maybe share a little bit for yourself. Like I was talking to a family today that want to work with us, and their daughter has this mysterious condition. And so then I'm troubleshooting, and she's like, well, do you think it's parasites? And I said, I have no idea, because it's not a mysterious, but all chronic disease is mysterious, but I just haven't heard of this condition that often, right? And so she's like, I asked a bunch of questions, has she been on antibiotics in the past? How was her birth? Breastfed, on. And then, it didn't seem all that, but she was around a lot of animals. They have animals there. But then when we were talking about, starting to get ready and are you having daily bowel movements? She says, no, I go, once every maybe a week or whatever, right? And it's like, okay, bingo, that's a really big sign, because if you're dealing with constipation, that's a big sign of parasites. So I believe, because she was super healthy before and she wasn't born with this, whatever condition it is, and it just hit her like in the last year or two, and she didn't have the what when we all were supposed to have that what in a couple of years ago. She didn't have that either. So to me, unless she's living in a toxic environment with a lot of metals or industry waste, which they're not, then it's probably a disruption in her microbiome. So, and that's where we always look, right? If we get the sleep and we're living a healthy lifestyle, but we're still having these symptoms, then we have to look to see, okay, what is going on with her microbiome? Is there a possibility that I'm dealing with parasites, too many parasites? And the answer is virtually always yes. We're living on planet Earth, and if we don't treat them, we just pick them up as we go along through our life. It's just part of life. We can't avoid them. You can not have pets, you can not eat meat, but you can still get the parasites on your produce. If you eat in a restaurant, if somebody's preparing your food, you can get parasites there. They can be on the shopping cart. They're everywhere. If you want to be outside, if you walk barefoot on certain ground that's contaminated, if you swim in lakes, right? The swimmer's itch is a fluke, a blood fluke. So they're just part of life. What we need to do is we need to restore balance, decrease their presence in our body so that we're symptom-free and feeling high energy and enjoying our life. And then we just monitor. And then periodically, depending on how we feel, we should treat parasites, whether that's once a year, whether that's twice a year. And two, when you're recovering, it's really important to treat over multiple cycles. So I have all of this information available to you because I want you to go to your doctors, to your practitioners, to talk to them about it. And I give you all the steps of what we take. But the key is that, don't say there's this lady in Canada that, because they're going to go, oh my gosh, who are you listening to? Just share the research. So go onto our website, livediseasefree.com, share Dr. Alan McDonald's video. There you'll see that that video is amazing, where he's sharing images of the filarial worms. He's also sharing images of Borrelia, which is the bacteria that's causing MS. On my masterclass training, you'll see that there's actually an image where there's a spirochete bacteria, the Lyme spirochete, in the myelin sheath of Alzheimer's, but it can be MS too. But he showed that, is it that your immune system is attacking your myelin, or is it that your myelin is infected with parasites in the myelin or beside it, and the immune system is just going after that, and there's war, right? That's what it is. Your immune system is intelligently designed, and I really believe it's by the grace of God I've learned all of this. I do study a lot. I do work really hard. I implement well. I'm not perfect. I haven't sterilized my body of the parasites, but I have been able to learn how to manage the microbes in my body well enough that I've lived an amazing life for 35 years after a diagnosis of an incurable disease like multiple sclerosis. And I had a horse as a kid. Again, I had to give up my horse because I was, being responsible and going to school and working and raising children. Didn't have time. The horse would have got fat. And couldn't probably afford it on my own either at that time. So now I finally have got a horse again, and I'm actually starting to ride in my 60s. And we're from Alberta, which is a little bit more, I used to ride bareback, which is crazy. I never fell off my horse, but I love just in the prairies, just going this was before MS. And so now I'm in my 60s and I don't have quite the courage, right? So we started off with a Western saddle. Now I'm starting to ride English because I just like to challenge myself. I like to learn new things. And that's the little fun thing that I'm doing for myself on the side. I have 7 grandchildren, and we just had a birthday party for one of my grandchildren. And out of all the people that were at the party, I was the only one on the trampoline jumping around with the kids. And that's what I do. I love to just get on the ground with them. I like to go down the slides with them. I like to do things with them because I know they're young for such a short period of time. And I want to have those memories. And for those of us that we feel like we've almost lost our life, like it was almost taken away from us, and then we get that second chance back. We do things that we never thought. Like, I'm a teacher by trade. I'm a high school math and science teacher, have a science degree. I never in a million years thought I would ever be doing this, where I have a pharmacist in my program. She's almost symptom-free. I've got chiropractors and medical doctors, tons of nurses that have taken our program. I'm not a healthcare professional, but I am a teacher. I'm a coach, and I give just instruction, and we have a proven system that works. And if you want to listen to some amazing successes from our students, life-changing successes, then make sure to go to our playlist on YouTube. You'll see there, you can listen to them, take some Kleenex, because they're so incredibly inspiring. Yes, it takes work. But living with disease takes work also. I'm going to go to your questions. Over 60, actually. Turned 63 this year, and I don't know. I am not sure what's happened. So Cool Black. I was 19 when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1996, and I will be 48 next week. For the last 7 years, I don't have the rest of your message. It didn't come through. Maybe you can share. Hi, James. Thank you for your kind words. Hi, Joanne. That's how I feel. And yes, healthy all my life. That's awesome. You had none of those symptoms, but yet diagnosed with MS. I truly believe it was a misdiagnosis. Possibly, Joanne. It is possible. I believe, so MS it's an infectious disease. So there are a small number of people that their immune system just deals with these parasites well enough, and they don't end up with MS. They might have the clinically isolated syndrome, the symptom or syndrome, the very first attack, and they don't have another one. And if that is you, that's wonderful. So loving it. Do you at any time use ivermectin or cattle poron? No, we've never used cattle poron for that drug. And again, ivermectin will not cure MS by itself. if you test well for it, it can be helpful, but it's not going to be a cure. If it was, I would tell you. It's very often one of the parasite drugs that our students test well for through energy testing. You can learn all about that on our masterclass, on my masterclass training. But it does not cross the blood-brain barrier. It is a very helpful drug. It's a very safe drug, but you have to use the right dose. You can't use a suboptimal dose, or else it's not going to be helpful enough. But again, it's not going to cure you. But it could be. Usually our students test well for 3 to 5 parasite drugs. And I don't know which ones you'll test well for. You have to just be energy tested. So Faye, you have experienced rolfing. It's kind of like, on some muscles, it's kind of like a pain that's not too bad, but in others, it's kind of like, oh, this is not very comfortable. So Nyoka, wow, you have the tingling feeling and you don't know what it is. You're going to try an antihistamine. So I wouldn't just live on antihistamines. They're not going to cure you. If you can't sleep, they definitely will help you to sleep, but check with your pharmacist if you're taking any other medications. What I'm sharing with you is for educational purposes. I'm not telling you to take anything. So for an antihistamine, it would have to be the drowsy form, so regular strength Benadryl you can find. You might find that it helps you to sleep, but don't take an antihistamine because you think it's going to get rid of your MS symptoms. What it did for me is that the polyamine, and I learned that through a couple of neurologists that were in the Netherlands many years ago, and they were managing MS in their patients with polyamine and changing their diet, so avoiding all caffeine and then certain foods and eating healthy. And it definitely helps. So there is definitely this history of antihistamine being helpful for multiple sclerosis, but not a cure. And that is because when you have parasites, there's like different pathways, like H1 and H2 pathway. And so the H1 pathway is like a really strong inflammation pathway. And so we can have this cycle of like a lot of inflammation. And then the H2 pathway is more of immune modulation, and that becomes downregulated. And so this is crazy, and this is just part of the research I've done. You can go back and look at my old videos, but there were doctors years ago that were giving MS patients histamine and having a lot of success. So when you give extra histamine, it actually helps to encourage that H2 pathway, which is more immune modulation. It was so popular, like there's a book, I don't remember what the name of the book is, but it's a book that's not in print anymore, and I found it on Amazon. I bought it for $200 because this is like huge, but you can look back on my videos, like on YouTube, Facebook, you'll see, like, do antihistamines and multiple sclerosis. I'm sure you'll find it. I've got over 100 videos on YouTube. So it's so crazy that this was in Tacoma, Washington in, I think around the 1950 or 48, somewhere in there, that this one doctor, maybe one or two, that they were giving MS patients histamine, and it became so popular they got a division in a hospital ward dedicated for these patients, and then that became over-flooded, and so then they used a hotel, and that all got shut down by the government. And they were really helping people. And it wasn't just MS. There was another doctor in Canada. I think he was from Russia or somewhere, European country. And he was helping people that had allergies and asthma by giving them histamine and really helping them a lot. He wrote a book also, and he was forced by our health authorities not to give histamine. So MS is an infectious disease. There's a lot of inflammation, and if we could treat the cause, we would recover for sure. Thank you, Faye, for your kind words. So, lemon, let's see here. I accidentally ate 1,000 times the suggested dose. Nothing happened. Oh, okay, she must be talking about a treatment. So yes, please don't mess around with drugs. They all have an LD50 rating. That means that lethal dose. And if you don't take enough, then you're going to make the parasites resistant to the treatments. If you take too much, you can make yourself very sick. Faye, you were a high achiever, pushed yourself to the limit, connected to trauma and a lack of self-worth. Hopefully you have more balance. There's nothing wrong with being a high achiever. I think that's wonderful and great. But for some of us, we just have to make sure that we get enough sleep, and we just, you can still do a lot because we're passionate people. We just love to do things. We love to get stuff done. We love to make a difference, but we still have to just make sure that we find that balance. And that is something I'm still working on. So Faye, you too, you enjoy your grandchildren. Awesome. And you're a teacher also. You love this. Yes. So Faye, if this is the first time you've met us, make sure to check out the most concise of the videos, and also the articles would be on our website, livediseasefree.com, under blog. And there you'll find amazing, and you can just pick and choose the articles that you want to look at. So you can just read things quickly if you want, or you can go through the videos. The ones on YouTube will be a little longer because there's Q&A on that also. But you'll really have a much greater idea of what you're dealing with and what you need to do to recover. So Kalpa, you're vegetarian. Can you please let me do the program? So the parasites thrive on carbohydrates the most. That is their favorite source of energy. So when you're vegan or vegetarian, it's difficult because you have to eat a lot of carbs because that's the biggest part of your diet. So we do have students that are vegetarian, but they are willing to eat like chicken and fish and eggs. The problem is if you just are a straight vegan diet where you cannot have any animal protein, then and with our Live Disease-Free diet, we're not having any beans or legumes or dried beans because of all the carbs will feed the parasites. And then we're also not having like any of the grains, so the wheat and the brown rice and the quinoa and millet, any grain. We're avoiding the grains because we're not digesting them well, and the parasites are. And when you do that, you'll notice that you feel a lot better. But if you don't have any of the grains or the dried beans, you're not going to get complete protein. You can't just live on lettuce and low carb vegetables and fat. You will completely fade away to nothing. So this is why, if you're able to, because some people it's for religious reasons that they don't eat meat, is that we don't at this time work with people that are vegan. Only it's not anything like we totally accept their decision. But I have seen, and I've worked with people that you just aren't going to get the same benefit, and getting ready to treat, you're not going to get all the same improvements because you're abundantly feeding the parasites. That's not to say that isn't going to change in time, but we've tried it this way right now and it doesn't work. We want people to be successful, but if you are willing to have like even fish or eggs and fish, because we want you to have a complete protein so that you don't lose your muscle mass and that you maintain your strength and your stamina, because to avoid those other foods. And you can get ready to treat within 2 to 3 weeks. And so as you're treating, and it depends on what disease you have, but if you have like multiple sclerosis, it's really, really helpful to go off of all of the grains and to go off of like low carbs. So you're having low carbs. So that's not the dried beans and legumes, etc. Will this help diabetes, type 1 diabetes? So we've had students that have diabetes, and just from the diet, that helps tremendously. There's a lot of research showing that diabetes is also caused by infections that can affect the pancreas, etc. So what I would do is I would just try it. Start with the diet and see how far you get. And then if you want to treat parasites, if you need support because your practitioner might not know how to do it properly, that's what we can help you to do in the Live Disease Free Academy. So Faye, yes, that drug does have some side effects. Does Artemisia Plus work? So it depends what you're using it for. So ivermectin and artemisinin will treat different things. Artemisinin is helpful to add into the treatment plan, but by itself it won't be enough either. Just Me, does major trauma or surgery cause parasite hyperinfection? Absolutely. So major trauma is really hard on the immune system, and it definitely can increase your, like anything that affects your immune system. A lot of stress, trauma, lack of sleep, all of that will, and diet. And then surgery, of course, because it's a big trauma to your body. And then also if you're taking antibiotics, which we usually have to take antibiotics after the surgery. So yes, that can definitely cause us to have, step into disease. And then somebody's asking about an oxidizing agent. And yes, we do use that. I can't say the name of it, but yes, we do use an oxygen type therapy. There are multiple ones. There's one that's our favorite. It's the most cost effective, but the parasite drugs are not a magic cure. The herbs are not a magic cure, and the oxygen therapies are not. But when you combine them, plus you're doing the prep phase, and if you want to learn all the steps of how we recover, I shared that in my masterclass training. Make sure to watch that. Just a couple more here. So mine are in my sinuses, Just Me, and really growing, getting scared despite of the medical professional because I'm having back-to-back migraines. So migraines have been linked to, I'm not saying that your migraines are caused by lesions in the brain, but definitely a lot of people with migraines have lesions in their brain. They may not have them. So there's lots of different types of people that have lesions. It's not just MS. People that are over 50, people that have Crohn's disease, people that have migraine headaches. So there's many different cases where we would have these pockets of infection in our central nervous system. And even with diet already, we've had people say that their sinuses start to clear because the parasites are going to be less active. Usually in the sinuses, very often it's fungal overgrowth. It could be candida or mold. And there was a study, and I've got that in my book also, Become a Wellness Champion, where they scraped the sinuses of 200 people in the study, and I think 98% of it was fungus. So they said we should call this fungal rhinitis because fungus, but nothing's ever changed, has it? So definitely pay attention to these warning signs that you're having, and it's time that you need to start, knocking back some of these bad microbes that will cause disease in the future. So Para Wellness Research Center has a reference manual after you join. Thank you so much for your kind words. So I'm pretty sure that Para Wellness Research Center, that is somebody that we've used and we like. That's great. Just be aware though that when our students sent a sample in, it came back negative, and then they did an ozone treatment and passed a really big worm, sent it in, and they said, oh yeah, you do have worms. So a lot of these tests are, even from the very, very best parasitologists, they're missing they're only picking up about 10% of the parasites that we have. And that's by a leading parasitologist saying that. So that's the problem that we have. So just if you do get parasite testing done and they don't find anything, please don't think you don't have parasites, because it's just that the tests are not very accurate. Yes, self-care is first. Nuts and seeds, just be really careful with them, Faye. They're harder to digest, they're higher in carbs, and they will make you feel lousy if you eat a lot of them because they will feed the parasites. Ozone sauna therapy is nice. It's a complementary therapy, but it's not going to cure MS. It does take a lot of work. You can add that on, but it's not going to be enough to cure MS. It takes treating from the inside, and also, prep work first, treating, and you can use different light therapies. You can use ozone, you can use, sauna, different therapies are fine. It all complements. If you do the diet on your own, are you able to help just treat the parasites? Let's see. If I do the diet on my own, are you able to help just treat the parasites? So I'm not sure what you mean by that, but we do have the plan. It's not just the diet. It's supporting the body. It's getting ready to treat. It's like it's a course that we offer, and it teaches you how to play an active role in your healthcare. It teaches you how to get ready to treat and how to treat, how to access the treatments, the practitioners you need, all of that. So, Christy, you said Ocrevus for progressive MS, eating a healthy diet just isn't helping. I know. Ocrevus is destroying your B cells, which are part of your natural defense, your immune system. So if you continue with Ocrevus, make sure to read up on the adverse effects. Cancer is one of them. And yes, I know of women that have had cancer after using Ocrevus, especially breast cancer. MS is bad enough. You don't want breast cancer on top of it. So in my humble opinion, your immune system needs to be protected, not destroyed. It's the parasites, and you can just look at my masterclass training, go on our website, livediseasefree.com, watch the masterclass training, but then also go to the blog post. I have so much research that shows that MS is an infectious disease. It's absolutely ridiculous, but there is so much money that's involved in keeping the status quo that there's a huge resistance to treating parasites, because we wouldn't need the MS industry or cancer industry, etc. So please be careful with Ocrevus, because it will make you weaker. And that's just, you can read up on that yourself. Absolutely. My dog has visible parasites coming from her nose, trying to treat her. So yeah, be very careful, because you'll be exposed to. Some of these parasites can lay 200,000 eggs in a day, right? So you have to be using a lot of hygiene. And like, we don't have our dogs in the house anymore. We've got a breed of dogs that prefer to be outside, and I'm really happy about that, but we still wash our hands. I use rubber gloves when I'm working outside usually, but it's, you just have to think all the time. And then just enjoy life, right? And just, when I'm working with, cleaning up manure, etc., I'm wearing gloves. Red light therapy is fine. Are specific nuts better than others? Yes. So be careful with peanuts and pistachios, because they're higher in mold. Macadamia nuts are delicious, they're addictive, and you'll probably eat too many. So I would be really careful with cashews and macadamia nuts. Having a little tiny small handful of raw almonds or filberts, or even pumpkin seeds or pecans once or twice a day, never after supper, very small, like 1/8 of a cup, very, very small. If you eat handfuls, it will feed the parasites. So Just Me, the diet is amazing. It is. It's super fresh, easy, quick, very nutritious. It's on our website, livediseasefree.com, under research, the Live Disease Free diet guidelines, and I give you lots of ideas on what to eat there too. So Just Me, I'm going to join your program. Awesome. You do need it. The master class is great. So Joanne, I 100% agree. Ocrevus is not the answer. I'm stopping it after 4 years. I don't know. I hope you last for 4 years, because that's twice. I think it's 2 infusions per year. I don't know. Like, you can stop it whenever you want to stop it. It's your body and you have control over it. Please research it really well. And if it is not helping you and it has all these adverse effects, then you really please consider that, because once you have cancer, it's pretty hard to reverse that. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And last one here. Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you for joining me. I really hope that my story has inspired you. So I have been living MS-free for 35 years. Does that mean I stopped treating parasites? No, I do periodically treat parasites, and I maybe do it at least twice a year, 3 times a year if I need to, but for sure twice a year, because of my history, because of what I do. Like, I love being around animals. So it's really important to me. And it's a skill that you'll learn and you'll be able to use it for the rest of your life. But we do have students that joined my program 8-9 years ago now, and they are still MS free. Also, Melissa is one of them. Lisa May, Marissa is working with us. She's worked with us for several years. She's homeschooling her kids. She's a Live Disease Free coach. There's quite a few different people that have been disease-free, MS-free, and other diseases too, for getting on to 8-9 years since I really had the more formalized large group program. So this is a very long-term, sustainable, getting your health and your life back and then managing it. And that's the key. So if this is all new to you and you want to learn the steps of what we take to recover, make sure to watch my masterclass training. It will be just above or just below this video. And if you need support, if you don't have a doctor that will help you treat parasites, and you want to learn this yourself, you want to really play an active role, you want to do it in the most cost-effective way, there's a huge benefit to knowing, especially like, do I really need all these tests? They're thousands of dollars. I could spend $5,000 to $10,000 on testing. Pam, what do you think? And I'll tell you. And so you'll save thousands of dollars by not doing a whole bunch of testing. And the MRI, if you want to have an MRI done, then you can have that done. It will show lesions, but please, I did another blog post on gadolinium, which is the dye they would use for the contrast MRI. So please, if you're considering an MRI with contrast, please read that and do a little research, because the gadolinium, they're finding that is not being flushed out of your body after the MRI. It is actually going into the central nervous system. It is a very toxic metal. So make sure to know what you're doing, because once you do it, you can't undo that. Yes, then you can have to do heavy metal detox, but that's a lot of work. So don't add any more toxic metals into your body if you don't have to. This is why you need to know all these things. So you're very welcome. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll be back next week. If you want to help us to share the word, if you want to help us to get people talking about parasites, get people talking about the cause, treating the cause, talking about recovery, right? Me and my 63 years old, back to riding horses, because I just didn't take the time for myself. It's just been work and grandkids, and now I have this little hobby on the side, but it's so much fun. And we live in a forest, and so we can go on trail rides, and it's just the best. Besides my grandkids, it's number 2. So hope you guys have a wonderful week. Please like, share, and subscribe if you find this helpful, and we will talk to you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.